All right, get ready to dive into some logic. We've got some audio lectures to unpack here, 7.mp3 and 8.mp3, I think they were called, all about categorical arguments. This stuff can get pretty complex.
Yeah, it really can. But it's also surprisingly relevant to, like, everyday life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these arguments, they pop up everywhere, don't they? From like casual conversations to these big formal debates.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically, today's mission, right, is to break down these core ideas of categorical arguments.
Exactly.
See how to actually evaluate them and, maybe even encounter some like really thought-provoking situations along the way.
Looking forward to it.
Right. Me
Please.
too. This stuff is fascinating. So let's start with the basics. What are categorical arguments? Like, I feel like I've heard the term before, but I could definitely use a refresher.
Okay, so think about it this way. Categorical arguments are all about how different categories relate to each other.
Okay.
Like, do all members of one category also belong to another category? Or are some excluded?
So it's kind of like sorting objects into boxes and then like seeing how those boxes, fit inside other boxes.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And to make these comparisons super precise, we have these 4 standard forms of categorical statements. They're like the building blocks for these arguments.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's hear about these building blocks.
All right, the first one's called the universal affirmative.
Universal affirmative.
We call it UA for short. And this claims that all members of a subject category belong to the predicate category. Like, for example, all dogs are mammals.
Got it. So it's like a really broad statement about an entire category, right?
Exactly. Then we have the universal negative, or UN. And that one says that no members of the subject category belong to the predicate category, like no dogs or fish.
Right, we're drawing a line in the sand with that one.
Exactly.
No crossing over. But what about like those statements that aren't so black and white? Like my dog right now, he's definitely not a fish, but he's also not a mammal. He's just a really good boy.
Right. So in those cases, we would use a particular affirmative, or PA.
Okay.
And that says at least some members of that subject category belong to that predicate category. Like,
Yeah.
Some dogs are brown.
Gotcha. So we're not talking about all dogs here, just at least one that fits the bill.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the last form?
The last one's called the particular negative, or PN, and it says that some members of this subject category are not members of the predicate category, like some dogs are not brown.
Okay, so those 4 forms, they give us like a way to make very specific claims about how those categories, those boxes, relate to each other.
Exactly.
It's interesting to think about how these like seemingly simple statements, they form the basis of so many arguments that we hear like every single day.
Absolutely. And once you understand these forms, it can really help you break down those arguments and see if they actually hold up logically.
Ooh, I like that. It's like having X-ray vision for arguments.
Yeah, exactly.
But how do we actually know if an argument is good? Like, does it just have to sound convincing?
Well, that's where the concept of validity comes in.
Okay.
So a valid argument, it's not necessarily about how persuasive it sounds.
Right.
It's about the relationship between the premises and the conclusion. Like, imagine a recipe. If you follow those steps correctly, you're guaranteed to get the cake.
Okay, yeah.
But if you mess up the ingredients, even the best recipe in the world won't save you.
I like that. So valid argument, it's like a recipe where the conclusion is that delicious cake, and then the premises are those ingredients and instructions.
Exactly. So in a valid argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true. They're like logically linked.
And an invalid argument is like, I'm guessing, where those dominoes don't quite line up right.
Exactly.
Even if some of them might be true individually.
Yeah, even if the premises are true, if the argument is invalid, the conclusion might be false. There's just no connection between them.
Okay, so it's not just about the truth of those individual statements.
Yes.
It's about how they connect logically. Like having all the right ingredients but forgetting to turn on the oven.
Exactly. And that's what makes these arguments so fascinating, because it's really going beyond that surface level and actually looking at the underlying structure of that reasoning.
We want to be those logical master chefs, right?
Yeah.
So we need to examine the recipe itself. We can't just check the ingredients.
Exactly. And that's why we need methods for actually testing the validity of these arguments.
Okay, well, give me the rundown. What kind of tools do we have in our logic toolkit?
So we have 2 primary methods for assessing validity: the test method and the Venn diagram method.
Venn diagrams. Oh, those take me back to school.
Yeah.
Remember all those like overlapping circles?
Yeah, they're really useful for visualizing logic. because those circles represent the categories, and we can arrange them to see if the conclusion of the argument is already contained within those premises.
Wait, so if the conclusion is like a hidden picture within those overlapping circles,
Yeah.
that means the argument's valid.
Exactly. And we use shading and X's within those Venn diagrams to see if the conclusion logically follows from the arrangement of those circles.
Like a visual puzzle, right?
Yeah.
That unlocks that logic.
Yeah.
What about the test method? Like, what kind of tests are we talking about?
So the test method involves 4 specific tests, and they're like safeguards against common logical errors.
So it's like a checklist for, like, good reasoning.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they have names like the equal negatives test, the quantity test, the distributed conclusion test, and the distributed middle category test. And each one targets a specific type of logical misstep.
Those names sound kind of intimidating, but can you give me a quick example of how one of these tests works in practice?
Sure, let's imagine someone argues that all cats are mammals because all dogs are mammals. You know, at first it might sound kind of convincing, but the logic's actually flawed there. Just because cats and dogs share one category, mammals, doesn't automatically mean they share all categories.
Ah, I see, I
Yeah.
see. So that test helps us avoid making these, like, sweeping generalizations based on those flimsy connections between those categories.
Exactly.
Okay. This is really making me think about how often we just, like, accept arguments without really breaking them down.
Yeah.
But you know what really caught my attention in those lectures? Valid arguments with just one premise. Like, is that even possible? I always thought you needed at least 2 statements for an argument to, like, to clash.
It is possible. And those one premise arguments can be surprisingly powerful.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. So how do you make a one premise wonder? What's the secret ingredient?
One technique is called contradiction. So basically, if you have a statement that's true, then its opposite, its contradictory statement must be false.
Yeah.
That.
So if I know for sure that all cats are black is true, and let's just say for this example they are,
Yeah.
then its opposite, some cats are not black, must be false.
Exactly. That's the power of contradiction. And because of that relationship, we can actually build valid arguments based on those contradictory pairs.
Wow, that's so cool. What other techniques can we use for these one premise arguments?
Another technique is called conversion, where we swap the subject and the predicate of the statement.
Okay.
But there are very specific rules for when this is valid, like converting some birds are blue to some blue things are birds. That's a valid move. But you can't just rearrange the words however you want.
It's like we're playing grammatical hopscotch, but there are, like, rules to the game.
Right. And the lectures actually mention 2 more techniques, contraposition and inversion. They're a bit more complex, they have their own set of rules, but they give us even more ways to work with those statements and create those valid arguments.
Like, we're learning this, like, secret code for logic.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But tell me, how does all this one premise magic connect back to what's in those lectures?
Well, the lectures actually give us a bit of a cheat sheet. They list 16 valid argument forms based on these techniques.
Wow, that's really helpful. So we're not just, like, wandering around aimlessly in the wilderness of logic.
Exactly.
We have a map for these, like, one premise journeys.
Exactly.
Okay, this is amazing. But I have a feeling things are about to get, like, a little more complex.
Yeah.
We've been talking about one premise arguments, but there's this whole world of two premise arguments out there, right?
Yes, there is.
The categorical syllogisms.
Exactly, which take us to a whole other level.
Okay, yeah. I think maybe we should save those for part 2. Syllogisms. They sound intimidating, but maybe logic is just trying to, like, impress us with big words. I'm ready to tackle those, but I think we should take a break and come back for those 2 premise powerhouses in the next part of our deep dive.
Agreed. Let's take a break.
All right, welcome back. I'm still thinking about those one premise arguments.
Yeah.
They're really something, huh? But now I'm ready, I think I'm ready, to step into the ring with the 2 premise heavyweights, the categorical syllogisms.
Excellent. Syllogisms definitely add another layer of complexity, but they're built on that same foundation that we've already explored. It's like leveling up our logic skills.
Love it. Leveling up. I'm all about that. So what's, like, the blueprint? What makes a syllogism a syllogism?
Okay. So, to be a categorical syllogism, an argument needs to meet 3 specific criteria. Think of them as, like, the rules of the game.
All right, I'm ready. Lay the rules on me. I want to be the referee of logical arguments.
Okay. Rule number 1. A syllogism must have 3 statements, 2 premises, and 1 conclusion.
Okay.
Kind of like a logic sandwich.
Ooh, a logic sandwich. All right, I like it.
The premises are the bread, and the conclusion is the filling.
Okay. All right, so what's the next ingredient in our logic sandwich?
Okay, the second rule is that the whole argument must revolve around three and only three categories. So each of those categories appears in exactly two of the three statements.
Got it. So it's like they got to partner up.
Exactly.
No wallflowers allowed in syllogism land.
No wallflowers.
What's that final rule?
The final rule is that conclusion, it has to bring together the right pieces. You can't introduce like some brand new category that wasn't mentioned in the premises.
Okay, so it's all about making sure that the conclusion logically follows, like no surprise endings in syllogism land.
Exactly, exactly. And speaking of syllogisms, the lectures you sent over actually had this really fascinating example about the aorta.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the aorta, the big artery, carries blood from the heart.
Exactly.
Okay, a medical mystery. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So the syllogism starts with this premise. Elastic arteries are the large arteries capable of undergoing passive stretching.
All right, so our first category is elastic arteries. What's next?
The second premise is the aorta is an elastic artery.
Okay, so we're bringing in our second category there, the aorta. We're linking it to the first one. Does the conclusion bring in that third and final category?
You've got it. The conclusion is the aorta is capable of undergoing passive stretching.
Okay, so our third category there is things capable of undergoing passive stretching. And the argument uses those connections between elastic arteries and the aorta to reach the conclusion.
Exactly. And this shows how syllogisms can actually help us reason about the world, from anatomy to even like everyday decisions.
It's like this mental framework for connecting ideas,
Yeah.
reaching logical conclusions. Pretty powerful stuff.
Hmm.
But there was something else in those lectures that really stood out to me. That thought experiment from Judith Jarvis Thompson.
Oh, yes.
Now, I've heard her name before, but can you remind me who she is and what this thought experiment's all about?
Yeah, so Judith Jarvis Thompson, she was this really brilliant philosopher, and she was known for her sharp thinking and these creative arguments that she would make. And her most famous thought experiment, the one that really kind of shook things up, is it's called the famous violinist scenario.
Okay, the name alone is super intriguing.
Yeah.
I'm ready. Lay it on me.
Okay, so imagine waking up one morning and you find yourself hooked up to a famous violinist. You've been kidnapped, basically, by the Society of Music Lovers because you have the only blood type that can save his life.
So I'm like a human life support system for this violinist?
Exactly.
Okay, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
And kind of flattering, I guess.
And the catch is that the doctors tell you have to stay connected to that violinist for 9 months.
9 months, that's a serious commitment.
Otherwise, he'll die.
Okay, where is this going? I need more.
So Thompson, she uses the scenario as this really, really powerful analogy to pregnancy to explore the ethical debate around abortion.
Wow. Okay. I see where she's going with this. But how does she make that connection? What's the core of her argument?
So her point is that, even though the violinist has a right to life, it's not immediately clear that his right overrides your right to bodily autonomy.
Right. So it's not about whether the violinist deserves to live.
Exactly.
It's whether someone else should be forced to use their body
Exactly.
to keep him alive, even for a limited time.
For a limited time, yeah.
Okay. This is giving me a lot to think about. It shows how logic and philosophy can help us examine these complex issues from different angles.
Absolutely. They give us the tools to really analyze situations, identify the assumptions, and think about the consequences.
And that's crucial, right?
Yeah.
For making those informed decisions.
Exactly.
Both in our personal lives and as a society.
Absolutely.
Man, I am ready to keep flexing those mental muscles. We've covered so much already. We've got those fundamental categorical statement forms,
Yep.
the intricacies of the syllogisms, and now this mind-bending ethical debate.
Yeah.
What's next on our logical journey?
Well, we've explored validity in a lot of depth, but there's another really crucial aspect of good arguments, and that's soundness.
Okay.
So an argument can be perfectly valid, but if its premises are shaky, then the conclusion won't hold up.
So it's not enough to just have a beautiful structure.
Exactly.
We got to make sure that our logical house is built on solid ground.
Yeah. A solid foundation.
Soundness.
Soundness.
All right, I'm ready. I think I'm ready to learn more about that. Shall we move on to part 3 and explore the secrets of sound arguments?
Absolutely. Let's continue our deep dive.
All right, welcome back. I'm so ready for part 3 of our logic adventure. It's been quite a journey, We've gone from those basic categorical statements all the way to the complexities of syllogisms.
Yeah.
And we even had that mind-bending ethical debate.
We did.
But now it's time to tackle this concept of soundness.
Yes.
I feel like this is the key to unlocking those truly reliable arguments.
You're right. It really is the gold standard, Because it's not enough for an argument to just be valid.
Right.
It also has to have premises that are actually true. Think of it like building a house. You need a solid foundation and a well-constructed structure for it to really stand the test of time.
Okay, so we're not just playing with the structure of arguments anymore, right?
Right.
We're making sure that they're actually grounded in reality.
Right. Exactly. We're going beyond just the form of the argument and looking at the actual content of the statements.
Gotcha. So an argument can be logically airtight but still lead to a false conclusion if it's built on shaky ground.
Exactly. It's like following a recipe perfectly but using spoiled ingredients. You might do everything right, but the end result is not going to be what you want.
Yeah. It's like that saying, garbage in, garbage out. Right?
Exactly.
You can have the most elegant structure, but if your starting point is flawed, your conclusion will be too.
Yeah, and that's why evaluating for soundness is so important. It really helps us distinguish between arguments that are, just kind of clever wordplay and those that can actually lead us to reliable knowledge.
Okay, so can you give me an example, an example of a categorical argument that's valid but not sound?
Yeah.
I need to see this in action to really wrap my head around it.
Sure. Let's consider this argument. All unicorns are magical creatures.
Okay.
All magical creatures are purple. Therefore, all unicorns are purple.
Okay, I can see the structure there. It follows that pattern.
Exactly. It's valid. The conclusion follows logically from the premises.
Yeah.
But those premises themselves, they're based on, fictional creatures, right?
Unicorns and purple creatures. I think we've entered fantasy land.
Exactly. So even though the argument is valid structurally, it's ultimately unsound because it's built on that foundation of fantasy.
Whoa, this is really eye-opening. It's so easy to be swept away by an argument that sounds logical.
Yeah.
But if we don't check those premises against reality, then we can end up in some pretty strange places.
Absolutely.
It's like being given a map to a treasure island that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
You might follow those directions perfectly, but you're never going to find that treasure.
You're not going to find it.
Okay, so how do we become savvy logic explorers?
Right.
How do we make sure that our arguments are really solid?
It comes down to critical thinking, questioning assumptions, looking for evidence, being willing to challenge even those arguments that sound really, really convincing. Don't just accept things at face value. You got to dig deeper, ask questions, and really make sure that those premises hold up.
That's great advice. Be a detective of logic. Always searching for clues. This has been an amazing deep dive. I mean, we explored the whole landscape of categorical arguments, learned how to test them for validity.
We did.
And now we've uncovered the secret weapon, soundness.
Yes. It's been a pleasure guiding you through this world.
This is great.
And as you continue your own explorations, remember to keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
For sure.
Look for those connections between categories, test the structure of the reasoning, and always make sure that those premises are grounded in truth.
Those are words to live by. And for all of our listeners out there, remember that the adventure of logic and critical thinking doesn't end here. Keep asking those questions, keep challenging assumptions, and never stop exploring that world of ideas. Who knows what amazing discoveries you'll make along the way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.